Just to read 15 minutes a night. Last night she read a book about a space mouse captain. Anyway.
I remember when my sister got to learn to read and I wasn't in school yet. I was like 5 and I was so jealous of her.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome reading.
You stole my glasses.
They may have thrown it away, Joy.
Really? Who throws something in here? Why did
Janitors?
Can I have that? Is that yours? You're using it?
That thing?
Yeah.
There's stuff in it, I think.
You want me to use that?
I just need something.
There are some boxes over there. I
But
don't
they're
know.
not something on. And they're not big enough.
Oh, your standing desk box.
Yeah, I
Flip
think
book box.
this stand.
Yeah.
That helps.
You're welcome. All right. So, okay. Today, I know that I had marked the review session as current, and you guys saw that and noticed that we're doing password encryption. But I kind of want to backtrack on that and pivot to JSON routes in Spring. So we've done kind of REST controller stuff before, but we're going to kind of hit it a little bit harder today. We're going to start working together with the front-end team. So this weekend's project is not going to be the same as what we normally have. We're going to just give you requirements in a wireframe. You're going to work with the front-end student to accomplish the task.
What if we're behind though?
You're going to be working in groups, so you can contribute what you can. So, yeah, but we'll talk about that more. We'll work together. Okay, so JSON routes. What do we know about JSON routes so far? Like when you hit a JSON route, what does it give you?
File?
JSON, right? The data, JSON data. Okay, so any JSON data. And do you remember how we have been in Spring defining a JSON endpoint? In Spark, we use like the JOD parser and the JOD serializer. It's just a random endpoint, and we just serialize some data and return it back to the client. Right? With Spring, we do most of our work with annotations. So I think we discussed this briefly. When we first introduced Spring, I believe we talked about APIs. Yeah. Right? So the request mappings for normal controllers, they handle templates. They render templates. They return HTML. There is another annotation. It's not just controller. It's REST controller. If you have a class that's marked with REST controller, it will return JSON instead of rendered template. Okay? So that's kind of the meat of today, is we're going to talk about how to like do CRUD stuff when the CRUD that we're doing is focusing on JSON, right, and not form submission data. All right. So we're going to go to our Spring initializer again. I think it's start. Spring. Yes. I remembered it. That's good. Let's pull this out real quick.
I like the Spring initializer.
That's pretty slick.
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's nice. So comment about the Iron Yard. Charlotte, I'm going to call it. And then the artifact is going to be Angular Spring. And my dependencies I'm going to have as Web DevTools JPA H2. Web DevTools JPA H2. Okay.
This is Angular.
Well, we haven't included Angular yet, but we're going to. Yeah. So we have Angular Spring here. I want to copy, well, I want to move this actually to my code directory. Code August 2016, Angular Spring. Okay. Once I have it moved, I'm going to make a new IntelliJ project from existing sources. Ugh. I go here and say refresh, Angular Spring, say Maven project. We're going to import them automatically. Next. Next. So now we have our Angular Spring project, right? So, next thing we need to do is download these Angular assets. So let's do that now. We need to move them into what's called just a public directory here in the root of our project. So let's go back to code, August 2016, Angular Spring, public. I'm going to take these 3 files and copy them into this folder. Okay. You see here they're reflected accurately now, like so. Okay. So we need to add some data to our resources file, our application.properties. We're saying here that in application properties, we're going to be using H2 for this Angular Spring project. So we're going to ditch Postgres temporarily, right? Now this entry means that we're going to generate the schema on application startup like normal. So this is what tells the system we're going to be generating our tables based off our entities. Okay. And this is a config setting that determines like every time it's as closely related to the generate schema on startup, but there's like a strategy for what to do if it already exists. So you could optionally drop and recreate all of your tables, but we're going to prevent that from happening with this line. Okay. All right.
Where'd you get your application from? Where do you download? No.
Yeah, this should be already in your project. Yep. So yeah, I mean, I guess we can run it right now if we want to. We can run it here by opening up the application and clicking run. So just like we had before, we have issues with this, right? I mean, we have a way to enter in user data, but when we add, we get errors all over the place, right? So our job is going to be to update these endpoints so that they actually do things and you try and post user data, right?
So that's like all front end stuff right there.
Yeah, this is all JavaScript and HTML and CSS.
I actually like that.
I mean, it looks nice.
Yeah, it does.
This looks like a Bootstrap template. So there's like there's a library in the front end called Twitter Bootstrap. It lets you like have these boilerplate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript packages. Basically, it gets you up and running with a website pretty quickly. So like when I made this website for my neighbor, I used the Bootstrap template. Like,
Yeah, that's nice. I like it.
yeah, this isn't really. This is like pretty. But yeah, like I didn't have to.
So my sleep.
Yeah, I mean, like, I found some stock images that were free that I liked, and then I basically just picked a Bootstrap template, and now I have like I don't have to worry about all the HTML and CSS it took to like build this from scratch. I just modified it to what I wanted to do, right?
So was that going to like mobile record?
Yeah, so this is called responsive design. So if you, and this might be not a normal thing that people do, is like resize the browser window, but like when front-end developers like are evaluating a website, a lot of times you'll see them resize it like this. So a lot of modern web development, like there's not a different mobile site per se, it's just a site that's delivered at a different resolution. So it's the same website, it's just this viewport. So it looks like a mobile device, right? So it displays different stuff based off of how big the viewport is.
Short question. How did you get to the side where you saw those errors again? What was the quick command?
Command-Alt-J.
Yes.
So anyway, this Angular HTTP example looks straight out of the Bootstrap. It looks very bootstrappy. So you see that you have this button here, this button here. It looks like they just made a quick bootstrap thing. So you can make something that's pretty impressive and easy to use and easy to look at pretty quickly with Bootstrap.
Nice.
So like hint, hint, final projects, hint, hint. Bootstrap might be a good thing to do. But we also have a front-end team we're going to pair up with, so that's also a good option too. So anyway, keep that in the back of your mind. The Angular application uses these APIs on the back end, right? So we have to build the APIs the application runs on, right? All right. So, all right. So the tricky thing about Angular, and I'm just going to read off this paragraph here. They send query parameters as JSON. So we've done this before. We've handled JSON requests before from the form body. Remember in Spark, it was request.body, right? That is different. Like when you post data with a form, it looks different to the server than if you post data with a JSON payload, right? So by default, if you were to submit a form, it would look like this. This is basically a simplified version of what a post request looks like to a server. So we're posting to blog posts. The content type is this, which is basically a URL encoded form. So you can see, like, this is basically what the form submission would look like. So you have the name of the field, and then you have the value of the field, right? Separated by and signs. So this is the name of this other field, and then the value of this field. This one only has 2 fields. If you're posting it as JSON, it's a standard JSON object. So by default, we need to basically change how we're interpreting data on the server. Because we're no longer receiving form data, we're receiving JSON data. Hey, Aaron.
And the percentage 20 on the,
Yeah.
that's the, that's just like the white space, right? So.
Yeah, it is. So check it out. Code, yep.
Okay.
So interesting thing is that if you decode it once, well, this is a little bit too, I'll make this page a little smaller. Zooming tricks, okay. So we're gonna encode this, it replaces all the spaces with %20s. If we encode it again, it's gonna replace all the percents with %25s. So you can then just like encode it a million times. But that's
Why would you want to do that?
You wouldn't ever want to do that. There was a bug in a CMS that I used that double encoded URL parameters, which was really terrible to use because I had to decode it twice to get to the actual data, which is annoying. If you have a CMS that costs like $250,000 and they can't get that right, there's a problem. All right, so see, we're storing user data, right? So that's the purpose of this application. We can see it's a registration form. We're going to store user data with our RESTful endpoints. I'm going to send money to my wife. So since we are reasoning about users, we need to make a user class. And since we need to store it in a database, we need to make it an entity, right? Let's do that. Oh, weird. Here it is right here. That's crazy. All right. So new class user. Replace this with this. All right. So review time. We have a user class, which is standard Java regular class. In terminology, this is called a POJO.
Pojo?
Yeah, plain old Java object, right? That's not a me thing, that's actually a thing. You'll hear the term POJO around. It means that there's no bells and whistles here. This is just a class with some fields on it, right? But what we have done with this POJO is added annotations to it, right? So this annotation marks it as an entity. This annotation sets the table name for this entity. These annotations mark this ID field as an ID in our database table. This annotation specifies that the ID is generated for you, okay? And then these column annotations indicate that these fields are columns in the entity and that they have to be specified. They are non-nullable, okay? So this is your entity. Remember, we stored entities, we managed entities with the repository, right? And we extended the CRUD repository interface. Yeah? Okay.
We have a repository for this one?
Not yet. We do now. Well, as of a minute from now. So we need a user repository to extend the CRUD repository.
We have our CRUD repository.
CRUD repository is given to us by Hibernate. It's actually not Hibernate. It's just a Spring thing. Interesting. So if you're interested in like how we define generics, talk to me later. We can discuss what this means, okay? Because this is pretty cool, but also very complicated. Yep. So we have user repository that extends CRUD repository. Remember that CRUD repository is two types here in this generic expression. This is the thing we're storing. This is the type of the ID column that we're storing, right? So we're going to, yeah, actually it says add getters and setters for our entity. So let's go ahead and do that. Do I want set ID? Let me think about that. No, I don't. No, I do. I need it. In order to generate an object, we need to call set ID. So yeah, we're gonna have all those things there.
Is it better, because I'll like delete those after I don't use them, but I just put the getters and setters there just to have them if I do need them, and then you can go back and like delete them later if I don't use them.
Yeah,
Is it better to do that initially or after?
I would say that if you're building a class, you should design it, because what you're talking about is class architecture, right? And you're going to want to bake in the things that you want to be able to do with that class, regardless of whether or not you're currently using them. So if you have a getter and setter for every other field, except for like one or two, but you still have a field there, and if someone who wants to use that class is going to have to go back and change yours if they need access to that field, right?
To do it initially.
I think doing it initially, but not because explicitly you're going to use it.
Consistency sake.
Yeah, it's hard. It's what I'm trying to get at is a little strange here. This is not so much of we're using it in the code already. It's like we have the getters and setters for every other field. We intend for this class to expose these getters and setters for these field values. So it's more of an architectural decision. Like this class has getters and setters for all its fields. So to remove one because we aren't currently using it, we can't guarantee that someone isn't going to use that class later and use those fields. So it would be a little strange for me to see that happening, to see them like those fields, those getters and setters removed in that scenario.
Okay.
From a compiler standpoint, that code is going to get removed. It's never going to make it into your end product. So it's unreachable if you never call it, right?
Because I remember you like looked over my shoulder once and you were like, oh, and she has those getters and setters that she's not even using. And I was like, I should delete those getters and setters.
I hope I don't sound like that. But no, I don't think that like deleting getters and setters is a really, I don't think it'll help improve your code. I think leaving them there is always good. You just want to have methods that where people can look at your class and easily determine your intent. You always want to write methods that just convey your intent. Like you want people to be able to get and set these things, you should write getters and setters. So if you write a getter and you just access the field value instead, then that's probably, hopefully, why I would say something like that. But hopefully I didn't sound that mean. Sorry if I did.
Well, I deleted them after that.
Okay. All right. So since we're dealing with REST now with Angular, we're going to have this REST controller instead of our standard controller. So a REST controller here is, this is a pain in the butt. You know what? Just do that. I'll do that from now on. So we need a new controller. It's called Angular Spring Controller. I'm going to paste the code. Now, one other thing, Lindsay, is that in terms of removing code, optimizing your imports is a thing that you can do to improve readability. So, for instance, I don't still have it open, but over the course of time, it's possible that you import things that you don't use anymore.
Mhm.
So I'm not using lists anymore here, so it's grayed out.
Yeah.
So you can refactor this. I think it's here. No. Yeah, use optimize imports here. It just removes all of them there.
Oh.
Yeah. So we have a REST controller. So instead of responding as HTML and accepting form data, marking as a REST controller, indicates that this is going to be, we're going to be interacting with these endpoints over REST, right? Remember REST, where we discussed REST, we've used REST a couple times now.
Mhm.
Do you guys remember what a RESTful API means? Yes. So there's resources, like the URL, and there's verbs, right? So that's the general high-level concepts. So there's verbs, like get and put and post and delete. There's a URL that you post, put, get, and delete to.
So it has those things expressed.
Yes.
Weird, but I don't know. I mean, like, at a basic level, not like Cam Newton this quarterback at a high.
Right.
Which is what you say in like normal terms. So when I hear high level, I think like that's really in depth and deep, but it's on the surface
That's interesting.
when you use it.
That's a really interesting observation because in programming, it's usually like if you get really low level,
Yeah,
like that's like really deep into the thing.
Luke uses it that way too. When we were at Skookum, it was like on a really high level, we're just 2 classes. And I was like, how is that really high?
Seeing over the trees versus being in the bush.
Yes, think of it like a bird.
Yeah, no, I get it. It just took a while.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, when I first used to high level, especially early on in the class,
Something more
I didn't
challenging.
know what we were talking about, and I was like, oh, that's like really good.
Jennifer, you have the what the hell look on your face right now. Do you have any questions about our material right now? No? Okay, good. All right, so we have an Angular Spring Controller. We have a user repository field here called users, and we annotated it with auto wired. Why do we have to do that?
So what else?
Why can't we just do this?
Has to know where it goes, or has to know what to do with that. Like when it comes to the table.
Because that's part of like the framework, right? Because that's part of the way that like you write it.
Because that's just how you told us to do it, Ben. Jesus.
It's like how would we Spark without like the get or post, right? It's like part of the framework.
Yeah, I mean, that's the,
Basic answer.
no, that's the, I guess, why does the framework need that?
Doesn't that like fill out the table automatically, basically?
Doesn't fill out the table.
Or just like, it,
What is
Repository.
like?
Yes.
Say again?
They populate it with data into control.
So Spring is going to be responsible for building this controller object. Okay. So if you make a new Angular Spring Controller object, like if we were to do it, we'd say Angular Spring Controller ASC equals new Angular Spring Controller, right? But if we did that, this users field would be null. It'd be set to nothing at default. So if we tried to be like users dot something, it would give us a null pointer exception because that's a null value.
So it's similar to like when we populate the template like with what we want, like in Sparks. Like so it's not the same, but is it similar to like adding certain data to like the Sparks framework?
It is similar.
except it like does it automatically, I guess.
Yes. So that's the,
It would be different, I
Yeah.
mean, we're populating it, but it's like the same kind of concept, right?
it's the same general concept. Yeah, you're filling out, you're in the template, you're just responsible for using data, but you don't actually get the data. It's given to you from the template's perspective. The same thing is going on here. So I don't know if you guys remember me mentioning before, but the concept of dependency injection. Okay.
Yes.
So dependency injection is when the Spring framework creates this controller object. It's going to set this users field equal to an anonymous class that implements this interface. So user repository is an interface, keep in mind. So we can't have a new instance of an interface. We have to implement a class, or we have to have a class that implements that interface. So in the Spring framework, it's going to see that we have this interface, and it's going to see basically that this interface extends the CRUD repository, and it's going to register it with Spring to say, like, when you ask for a user repository, give them this object. So when it creates a Angular Spring controller, you already know that in this request mapping, this is filled out with a value specified by Spring. Okay?
So what would be the value there?
it's an anonymous class that implements the user repository interface. So you're not in control of the actual class
Okay.
at all. The Spring will generate that for you.
That's kind of scary though, right?
Scary, powerful.
Yeah.
Scary, awesome. Scary, totally legitimate. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It is kind of a strange thing to think about, where you are given objects that you don't define yourself. But once you get accustomed to that, it actually allows for greater cohesion. So like an object-oriented program, there's these concepts called coupling and cohesion. You don't want your classes to be coupled together. Like you don't want to couple together like your H2 database with your controller class, right? If you couple those things together, then you can't easily then change H2 with Postgres, for instance. But if you use an interface instead, which we're doing here with the code repository, then you're guaranteed to have only ever worked with the interface and not the H2 specific stuff. So you can swap out another database provider with like Postgres, for instance, and you don't have to change your controller code at all because you've always ever worked with the interface. So you have no exposure to the actual underlying class. So it actually forces, like the process of dependency injection and using interfaces is a really advanced, high-level, weird that I am not using that to mean awesome, way to architect your code to make it easy to swap out dependencies. So it's a thing, like if you use the Spring framework and you use dependency injection, or if you have a full understanding of dependency injection, then that can only serve you very, 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 very well. No one's going to expect a junior level programmer to know what dependency injection is.
Wow.
Yeah. At least I wouldn't. If I interviewed someone and they were a junior level programmer and they told me what dependency injection was, I don't know, I'd be super impressed.
Awesome.
So study that, right? This is a very deep subject that you can go very, you can study for a long time, right?
It's really cool.
So I kind of want to look at the type of users. So we'll look at that. I'll debug this eventually, and we can call users.get type and see the actual class that Spring uses to implement our interface. But we'll just get to that. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So let's see. This is get you. Actually, you know what? Let's just go ahead and do it right now. Let's debug our app. All right, so refresh. When we refreshed, Angular asked for all the users by going to /user over a GET request. And so it hit this thing. So, yeah. So the Spring framework uses this thing called a simple JPA repository to implement our interface. So a simple JPA repository. So this is complicated. This is a default implementation of the quad repository interface, right? You know, actually, I would expect this to furthermore.
So it's like the entity manager.
Yeah. This isn't behaving exactly the way I would expect. I would expect this to be an anonymous class, but it implements a JPA repository. Anyway, this is the type of the object passed in, right? But you don't have to worry about that too much. I mean, we're just going to consume it. So we got rid of some of the errors, right? If we try to post data still, it's going to break. Yep, so we're listing users, but we can't post just yet. All right. So let's do that. Check out how easy this is. To request mapping to /user, the method is a post, and we have this method add user. This basically says we're going to get this user from our request body as JSON, since it's a REST controller, and then just save that user into our users repository.
So the page, when you hit add, it's going to send JSON to the backend, and all you do is request body, and it gets all that information.
Yeah.
So it's taking in a JSON file and how it's parsing it. Right, taking it apart and using the parts to build a user and then we're saving a user in the next line of code.
Yeah.
That's so much easier than Spark. In Spark, we would have had to do query params for all the three fields.
Yep.
Set those to variables and then pass those into whatever.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you use Spring over Spark?
Because it's much bigger. If you want to build like something very simple, very quickly, like stupid fast from like a building standpoint, you could use Spring or Spark. If you want to build like a legitimate web application that has like a bunch of extension points and configurable options, you'd use Spring. Because Spring has a lot that we are not going to cover. Like there's Spring plugins for like security. There's Spring plugins for like there's like a mailer and plugins for all the things like like if we go to this initial the Spring Boot initializer, these are all Spring plugins, right? So here's caching. Session stuff. You can if you want to include that there, you can enhance session things. You can include different view template engines. So we've used Mustache so far, but you could use FreeMarker or Groovy or TimeLeaf.
I've read that free marker.
Yeah, they're all just different ways of approaching the same problem, right? And then you have like different SQL options. Like you can use H2 or MySQL or Postgres. Or you can use a cloud provider here. Or if you want to use NoSQL, which is a different type of data storage, it's a key value store. Here's Mongo, Cassandra, Neo4j, and Redis. Those are all cool. So you can see these are all the available Spring Boot plugins that you could use.
Wow.
Right. So there's a lot of if you want to add in authentication through Facebook, you have that.
Oh, cool.
Right. You just include that, and you can basically authenticate through Facebook.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. So there's a lot more to Spring than there is to Spark. Spark is you want to build a page you want to build a website that has maybe 2 pages, and you want to render a template. That's fine. Here you could do it like this, right? Spring is like a Swiss Army knife with spots where you can attach other Swiss Army knives, right? Pretty cool.
Can I see your user class?
Yeah, so hold on 1 second. I want to point out one thing is that we have seen this before, but it's form body submission. So this is almost identical to what we've seen with regular post submissions. It just has this request body annotation here. And remember that we need to add this because we're parsing JSON instead of taking in form data like normal. So our user model, what did you have questions about?
Nothing. I just wanted to see if it solidified.
Okay, you don't want to talk about it? You just got it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. C'est la vie. I don't know if that's how you use that phrase, but I'm using it anyway. All right, so we added post data, so we can post now. So let's see if we can enter in stuff yet. So we have name, Ben, address, pants, email, my email address. Did I refresh? Hey, Oliver, do we have an interview today or tomorrow? That's fine. Yeah, okay. Okie dokie. Pants. Okay, so we have a user object. Username is Ben. Address is 33 Pants Street. Email is rangerman@gmail.com. Good. Pew. And then we listed, and we're all set. So we see our interface is a little bit broken. The reason this is happening is this is undoubtedly a table. Let's check this out. Yep. This is a table. You guys haven't been around for a long time in the web scene, but tables are a blight on the web development industry. So you can specify, like, before HTML and CSS were like a thing, like with standards and cross-browser support, it was kind of a wild, wild west in terms of what pages look like. The only thing that was consistent was that people could use tables effectively to lay out their pages. So like you could have a table with a specific fixed width, and you could use that. You could put in this table element, put all your content for the left bar, and this table element for your body, and this table element for the right-hand side. That's a brutal bastardization of what HTML and CSS are designed for. It basically just throws all the concepts of those out the window. But regardless, generating pages with tables was a very common practice up and through maybe 2005. Basically,
Wow.
all corporate web pages basically use just table-based designs. And if you are familiar with what they look like, you can still see table-based designs nowadays. So if you really want to like get Luke's eyes, like or maybe his mouth to twitch, or like him to sweat a little bit, tell him that we are, building our web pages using templates or using tables, because I don't know what he'll do. It won't be nice though.
So you can like recognize them if you see them online.
Yeah, you can. It's pretty clear because they suck.
Yeah.
Right. But that's not to say that table-based tables still have a role on the web, but it's only to describe what's called tabular data. So if you have stuff that makes sense to be in a table, then put it in a table. But if you're using a table to lay out your web page, then that's when you're using web pages incorrectly. And the reason I knew this was a table is because tables have fixed width sizes. And when I made this smaller, it basically was like, well, I can't go any smaller because that's the width it told me to be. And so it just overflowed its container and looked terrible.
Oh,
Right.
wow. That's a good way to find like potential clients though. Because you're like, dude, your website is way out of date.
Yeah, that is true. And you could totally do that. I'm sure they probably know that though. But yeah, anyway, that's a non sequitur. All right, so we have added post data to our app now through JSON, right? Good? Great. So now we're going to put our put route in. So keep in mind that put is distinct from post, and that the data is already expected to exist on the server, and you're simply modifying it, right? So update user, you're just saving this new user. So this is an interesting concept because I think what you're going to have to need in user is a pre-populated, see, because this call here to save is identical to this post. So let's look at how the body of our user differs. Jesus. My name. Edit my name. Let's say my name is Benjamin. Update. So user. ID is 1. Let's compare that to what we have when we populate a user here. So we add a new user like cart50@yahoo.com. Wait, no, that's, I don't know, Newburn. This is my mom. With my mom, the ID is 0. 0 is the default ID when you make a new user object. So this object has not been persisted into the database. It's just been created by Spring when you post that data. So this is the difference, right? So this, since the ID is 0, it indicates that like Hibernate's not going to find a user with that ID, so it's going to save that user in the database instead of updating an existing user. So we're using the same save method, but in this case, when we edit it, we edit my mom, say it's Ann Carter, when we update it, and the user populated here is 2, right? So when you generate that user, it's going to have an ID of 2, and then Hibernate's going to say, hey, users repository, do you have a user with ID 2? If so, let's save this updated data that we have for this user.
And 0 doesn't exist then.
No, in fact, when you persist this with save, Hibernate's going to see that there is no ID with, there is ID, like 0 is not a valid ID because we started at 1, right? It's going to see that there is no existing user with that ID, and it's going to save a new user that has that ID in it.
Is that bad? Like, what if you save a user and then just save another user right after? Are they both ID 0?
They don't have remember that IDs are auto-generated. So when you call save on an entity that has ID of 0, are you saying that like if you called save twice here?
You can create 2 users like Ann and Ben, both at 0, but you don't save them, then they're not actually users, right?
They're user objects, but they're not persistent.
What happens when you save it?
Well, when you save it, Hibernate performs an operation that's like look up user in the database, right? If the user doesn't exist, then save that user. And since ID is an auto-generated column, it's going to save the rest of those fields in a new row. So the fact that it's zeroed, it's not going to try and add that row with ID 0 to the users table. Since ID is generated for you, we mark it as a generated value. So when you save that entity into a repository, it's going to generate the ID for you dynamically.
So after, it's going to generate the ID after.
Yeah. So if we,
Oh, okay.
yeah. But if we specify something other than 0 as the ID, it's going to try and look up that ID in the repository and say, do we have an object here at this ID? Is this entity exists already?
Yeah.
Right? If it does, then it just puts this new data in that spot. Think of it like a hash map.
Right,
So the reason that we need put then, the put one, is to save the user into an actual ID.
No, we need put to, the put request is designed to edit data that exists already.
Okay.
When you have a post request, it creates new users.
And why does it change the ID from 0 to 1 or 2?
Why?
Yeah.
Because when we add a new record to our database, we need it to have a unique key. So like
So would that create 2 ands then?
if you hit save twice when we posted and to the server, then yes, it would create 2 and rows in your database.
So then how would you know which one to access?
Well, you wouldn't. You know what? Actually, it's possible to. Here, let's check it out. Let's see what happens when you do that. So let's say instead of calling save once, we call save twice. Because I have a feeling that it's going to actually modify the user object. So let's do that. So this second save on that existing entity will do nothing. So let's refresh. Name is Robin. Address is Weaverville. Robin@robin.com. Okay. So we add. So before this line is executed, Robin has an ID of 0, right? After that line executed, Robin has an ID of 3. So this second save is equivalent to finding the identity and resaving the exact same data. Since there's no changes made to the object, it'll save nothing. So likely Hibernate will optimize this out and not actually run any database queries.
So Robin is at 3, not at 0.
Correct. She's never entered in at 0.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just that when Hibernate sees a 0 come in with a user object, it'll ask the database if there is a user at row 0 or with ID 0. If it doesn't exist, it'll generate one for you. And it'll actually update our entity with the ID.
So that's how it knows the auto-generate.
So let's say we don't have save twice,
Yes.
and we wanted to call Robin on based on her ID, but she's at 0 and the user's saved. So how would we call her based on her ID number if we don't have an ID number that's assigned to her in the first one?
If we wanted to use Robin's data, we'd have to persist Robin first. So you'd have to just save Robin to the database.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
that answers.
So yeah, you would not be able to request data about Robin from the database without first saving Robin.
And that only happens like the second time. Because Robin's at 0 and user saved user, right?
Yes, so before this is called, this is just a user object. It's not special in any way. It's a POJO, remember?
Yes.
So it's just generated by Spring. You make a new user object. It's not persisted anywhere. It just exists in the scope of this method. So if you didn't save it to Hibernate, save it through Hibernate, then it would just stay a parameter and not be saved anywhere. The ID would just never be set. Then it would just stop existing, right? But when we save it, Hibernate is like, okay, we're going to persist this into our database. By the way, we're going to update your ID field to whatever the ID is from the database. Hey, what's up? Hey, we went over table-based design today.
Terrific.
Yeah.
You guys like this stupid trade.
I'm just kidding. I told them how terrible it was, by the way.
What is the box on your shirt? So I'm just totally dumb.
You know how, like, you don't remember, like,
Sorry.
I know. I was like,
that was
it was hard, actually.
spoilers.
What is table-based design? I don't even know that.
Luke.
Should I say that?
You don't remember back in the day when people used to build their websites with tables?
Oh, I thought you meant database tables.
Oh, yeah, no.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, this looks like a table because it's terrible right here at this
Pants
viewport.
Street. We still live on Pants Street.
Yeah, yeah. But it's more like 40 Pants Street now than 33. It used to be 33 Pants Street. Yeah, yeah. All right. See you later. So lastly, what we want to be able to do is delete our data at a specific endpoint. So we have this remove button. If we click it right now, it doesn't actually do anything. Well, it probably do something, and that something is throw an exception. So let's remove loop. So yeah, we have problems here. So we couldn't delete this. It got a 404 because there's no delete route, right? So if we go back here, let's add the delete and get routes. Wait, we'll do that in a second. Here's delete. If we want to delete one guy, we have user slash brackets ID request method delete. So we have this annotation that says this is a path variable int ID, and then it deletes from the database the users, or the user at that ID. So delete is a method that accepts an ID. We give it an int which represents the ID. It deletes that record from the database. Done. Done skis, right? This path variable annotation indicates that this parameter came from the path. Then which parameter comes in as the path is this position in the URL. So this realistically is going to come in at like users 1, right? So if we want to get data for one user, get requests, remember, because we're not posting any data, we're not updating any data, we're not deleting any data, we're just getting the data.
So that's if you just want to like display the user?
Yeah. We return the data. If you want to return the data over one user, remember that we're not building web pages anymore.
Yeah.
This is just API endpoints.
Okay.
And the whole web page is basically an Angular application, a one-page Angular app. So our CRUD repository has a find one method. It takes in an ID and returns you the entity of the ID. So you just return the user at that find one. Okay. So it returns a user. The REST controller will denote that this is supposed to be returned as JSON, and then so it'll return this as JSON.
Follow-up question. So what is that for? What is that whole get method for right there?
If you wanted to get one user.
For what purpose though?
If you want to see the information about one user instead of for all the users, then you get that URL.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we'll look at an example. We'll hit it outside of the app. We're going to rerun this.
So it's almost like what we did yesterday with like the sorting. So you're just finding one.
I think so. I'm not sure what you mean the same as we did yesterday with the sorting.
Like I have a table with all of them, and you just want one of them, or like a couple or whatever.
Find by category.
Yes.
Yeah.
Same thing.
This is the same thing, except this will never return anything, like return more than one row. So you're finding one at an ID. Yeah.
So you just use get methods for those.
You would use a get method if there were data you were interested in retrieving from the client.
Okay.
From a repository standpoint, you would use the find one method to get one row from a database. So you might use those in conjunction with each other to return data about one user back to the client. So let's remove these users. And then
ID should be deleted.
yeah.
Then Ben would now be 1, right?
4.
4.
Yeah, regardless of of what we've deleted, we're going to keep incrementing when we add a new record into the database.
So what happens to 1, 2, and 3 then? They're just blank spots now.
Well, from a table perspective, they're no longer existent. There's not even blank spots. There's no more spots.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not wasting space then.
No, the data's gone forever.
Okay.
It's just that the ID is always incremented when you add a new row, regardless of whether or not the data was previously deleted. So in the database engine, there's some internal system that's like ID count or something like that.
So this database only has one row with ID.
Yeah.
You would never use index.
What if somebody
That's not even a thing.
Yeah,
That's
that's
something-
not anything.
Yes.
What if somebody pulls like ID1, they'd have to know like what you're doing, right? Because they'll pull ID1 and nothing will be there. And they're like, well, wait, we have like, X amount of IDs. We should have 1, 2, and 3 too, right?
You shouldn't have that expectation. When you see row with an ID, it gives you no information about what other rows exist in the database.
Okay,
So you have no expectation of there being more or less than that row.
okay.
Just the only thing you know, there in the history of that table, there have been that many things inserted
Okay,
at any given time, but you don't know what happened to them after that.
that's a weird way to think about it.
Yeah, well, the ID is not really there to give you the position in the list like we have looked at before, like Will was saying. It's just there to uniquely identify that row in a giant list of rows.
Not chronological. But it is, but it's not.
It is chronological, just because, I mean, if you have a row with a higher ID, you know it was created after a row with the earlier ID, or the lower ID rather. Did I say that right? If you have a record with ID 5, you know that was inserted before a record of ID 10.
Just because you have 5, you don't know if you have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes, because they could have been deleted. Yep. Okie dokie, artichoke. Hmm?
The code that you just put in for
Yeah, you-
find one.
Yeah.
Wondering about that too.
What do you, like, for edit, you hit edit, and for delete, you hit remove, but if you wanted to sort by just one, what maps to that?
If you wanted to sort by 1,
Yes, so how would you get to user/ID for Ben?
you mean like what page on the front
Yes.
end
Where would you click on the front end to sort it by one?
to sort it? What do you mean by sorting?
No. What, you're using that get route for find one,
For find
what
one,
do you think, like, how you get that get route? Or is it just,
So if you added another user
Yeah.
right now, they would be at ID 5.
Uh-huh.
How would you display just ID?
I'm not sure if there is a way in the current app to just
Okay.
display one user.
That's
Honestly,
why I was wondering like what that game was for.
yeah.
Probably adding it
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. I think we're done with extending the application right now. What we're doing is just testing the app after we do this. So it might just be not really necessary.
Okay.
The Angular, I mean, it's up to Angular as to what to query, and it looks like with our operations, it all does the just the /user endpoint. But for your edification, if you look at if here, you can view the put requests, and here's the put requests, right? And this was get its /user and posts and get, right? So it didn't look like the Angular app ever requested one user. We can go to user. So here's all of our users, and we can do user 4. That's one user. So you can see it, the data, if you want to look at the data.
Would you be able to even do that if you didn't have that get method?
No,
Okay.
no. You would be able to do this, because like that, this is a different get method.
Understood.
All right, it's 11 o'clock. It's past 11 o'clock. Let's take a break before we get into testing.
Is there a vending machine?
I've been wondering that myself. I don't think so. We should probably get one for the new space. It's probably not plausible. Oliver,
Oliver.
can we get a vending machine? Can we get a vending machine?
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, can we do both? Because there aren't any snacks right now.
Spending a lot on snacks. Just saying.
You guys are eating so many snacks. We have a snack budget. You are not respecting the snack budget.
More than anything, it's
Yeah. You eat a lot of coffee, but I
I eat tons of coffee.
But
Is there a vending machine in like the mezzanine floor?
yeah, you can go there and drink coffee.
No, but is there a vending machine there? I don't
Yeah,
think
I
so.
don't see the vendor shit anywhere. For all I know, you have to get 7-Eleven.
Oh, 7-Eleven is like right down there,
It's a little.
like right across from
There's a
your
7-Eleven,
end.
Isn't it closer, isn't it right?
It's, you walk across the park
It's like right next to it.
and it's that.
Actually,
that's
I'm
really-
gonna walk
it's
over
Mel-
there
it's
and
behind
grab
Mel
something.
Oh, okay,
Literally walk.
literally?
You just don't.
Yeah, I've been there the last couple.
You got
It's,
Like,
it could be, that's like
got
a
another
convenience store.
128 pieces of furniture this morning.
128?
Yeah, well, they're tabletops and legs and everything.
Are you
But
storing related?
there's like a pallet's worth of stuff just downstairs that we just want to
Nice. We can do that this afternoon or whatever.
I'm just gonna do it, or I'm gonna hire some college students to do it.
You have offered YouTube. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes, I
That's awesome.
by Craigslist it because it's hot too.
So I did the homework last night in Morgellons also.
Yeah.
And so it works now, but I don't think it's like, by the books, like, how it should be done. So I just sent you a link.
Like a Rails thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
for feedback.
you do Ruby on Rails too? Like,
I did it last night, I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Go you. Freaking awesome.
Building a front app in Rails is like really good. It's like this seems so good. Did you use the scaffolding?
No, so I wasn't sure like the scope of what I did. I made the models and controllers.
Okay, that's good. Scaffolding will build the views and everything.
So right now it's just one view, and it's not, it's sort of like active.
One view.
Yeah. Like,
All of that.
yeah.
Typically, you
Because
have
like,
like
there's not really any reason, like, based on the requirements of the homework, there wasn't any reason to like have a list of the customers.
yeah.
So basically, it's exactly what the development is.
Yeah.
And then like, I'm using like, query strings, which I don't think is the way to do it in Rails.
You're using query string covers to do what?
Like at the top, there's like sort by alcohol, food, blah, blah, blah.
Just look at it.
So this is the. So, this is everything.
Yeah.
And then we do the toiletries. I do one of these.
Yeah.
This is basically it. Yeah, I didn't think so.
The URL at first thing.
I guess it's-
It's like a params.
Okay.
I'll give you some feedback.
Okay, well, then.
Your syntax outline is very strange.
I know, yeah. This is Ruby 9, which is like different.
That's like are you building your,
I feel like so this is all in the controller, I feel like this shouldn't be empty. I think I want to put functions.
yeah, in Rails 4, that's not really how it works. Using Rails 4, right? 5? Shit, it must be,
5.0.0.1.
is that a release or is that beta?
I never made a choice, so it's the default.
I just upgraded my app to Rails 4. I guess they have 5 now. So the active model drastically changed in Rails 4, so you don't have to specify each attribute in the existing model.
Yes, the only place that I specify attributes is in the schema.
Yeah,
That seems strange.
it does seem strange. But what Ruby is doing there is using, or what Rails is doing is using the metaprogramming abilities of Ruby to apply those at runtime. Those values. Yeah, it's a little strange to get accustomed to, but when you get to things like, you're not doing any hard stuff with this application, but if you wanted to update the data based off of form inputs, for instance, it's basically, I think what it's called, It's basically a way to whitelist series of parameters to be allowed to be updated by the front end. So the reason why, okay, so the reason why this the attributes out is because probably they wanted that to focus on the model and the class to focus on were the validation aspect of those models. And there was this awkward, like, for a while in Rails apps, there was this awkward, like, Azure accessible method. I don't know if you've seen that before, but it used to be an active model that you had to specify every thing that you wanted to be accessible with this thing called Azure accessible. Like attribute accessible. But then people were, like, there was actually a huge vulnerability in Rails for a short period of time where people could use those Azure accessibles to update information that you didn't want them to be able to update, change their ID, update random, like something they belong to, and stuff like that. So then they added this thing to the model. No. I'm doing this a disservice by trying to explain this on the top of my head. I need to look it up and give you some links. But basically, the removal of those Azure accessible methods, I think makes the whole process of updating data much cleaner. They have a whole different process of updating data now. That's basically delegates responsibility for deciding what's okay to receive to the controller. Then I guess they're probably like, we don't need these Azure accessibles anymore. They're just causing problems. And I think but I'll read up some blog posts and send it to you. But essentially, that's why those no longer have properties.
So, like in Java, you create the entity class, and then it models the database based on that.
Yes.
And this is like that.
This is not necessarily.
Yeah, like you sort of specify what the database should look like, and then it extrapolates to the object.
You're still not generating single queries. Active Record is still doing that for you. So Active Record's job is to basically take, like when you build a new migration, you're defining you define the migration in Ruby.
Yeah.
And then it's going to process that migration in SQL. So it's still, there's still a layer there that takes you one step away from the actual SQL execution. But yeah. It does not go from model in class to database table. It goes from migrations to database table, then from database table to class. The same as the generated class. And that it uses, again, like it's leveraging the meta programming aspect of Ruby to do that. Because you can't do that in Java. It could be like at a runtime generated field that Java uses, but with an interpreting thing like Ruby, you can use like reflection. Like, okay, let's respond to this field now with by querying this data. It's really a unique way of thinking about things. They probably have motives past what I've been able to describe. I also have it's like a whole Ruby instructor channel, internal Slack channel that can come up, but you guys have any idea what Azure accessible. Well, I'm sure a lot of you there. Okay. I was gonna say something else regarding meta programming. Oh yeah, when you call a method on in Ruby, you're not actually like in standard programming languages, like compiled languages, you have the method has to exist, right? It's like you get a compile sign error, it doesn't exist. In Ruby, it's with interpreted languages in general, it's all there's no compile sign error. It's all in the compilation process at runtime. It's all runtime, right? And when you call a method or you access a field in a Ruby object, it's basically the concept you want to visualize it in your mind is sending a message to that object. Like, hey, object, do you have a method that does this? And if it's named this, then run it. Right? That is, But if it doesn't have that, there's actually a method missing. Yeah, there's a method missing method on the Ruby object class that you can override and have it handle a message that you did not receive. So active record is using the shit out of that, probably. It's either using that or it's generating that. It's generating the methods at one time on that startup. So it's either using method missing a lot or it's generating that field when it So anyway, it's a way for you to think about like when you call messages on Ruby objects. It's like sending a message to that Ruby object saying like you have this. But you don't have to use them. Ruby is very shit. Interpret language in general.
Like gummy, like sugar, like the gummy things, like sour gummy worms. Save like a whole bag of them.
Cool. Wait, that was fine.
Just now when I walk
You
back.
don't release it.
That's like
There's kind of been in the past 6 months.
speak all week. It's like flatlining.
Actually, Rails is it's just a gem for Ruby. So you could like Ruby gems like with Rails.
Creating pie in the sky pizza.
Did you use Bootstrap?
Yeah,
So
it's
good.
exactly the same as my job.
Okay.
And I just added the word Rails.
Did you change the Rails text from Ruby?
I'm actually thinking it's the first. Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I'm craving it more than like fuel. So pie in the sky is number 1, fuel's number 2, and jet's number 3.
Really?
Is that the original order?
No, it's not, but now that's my order. Fuel was.
Oliver, hey, do you need more coffee?
Now I'm. Now pie in the sky is number 1. Actually, I'm gonna see if I can order no pizza from there.
Yeah, we're on board.
I gotta go pick up my pie. Pie in the sky in Uptown, it's so good.
I pretty much been.
Yeah.
Really?
Not like maybe like the past 2 years, constantly, so. It's been a while. But why?
They're so reasonable.
I think it's before, but those two games came out. If you remember,
$3 for a slice. It's not bad.
Each part of that studio
Or $2, $3 for a slice. $2.50 for a cheese.
So those like that's my favorite.
$2.75 for a single slice. That's really awesome.
It's cool, I love it, and it's you know, you grab like this regardless.
$6 for a small pizza. It's good. It's good. I'm telling you.
So every time I say your name,
Yeah.
it's like, oh,
I would just do 2 slices probably. Yeah, really good pizza though. But I wonder how big the small slices are. Well, the slices are like this big.
Well, it was funny, like, it just started with some chicken.
I'm hungry. I'm really hungry. You can't order this. I don't have money.
Brown University.
Get it!
I mean, like, I was fine with it.
Really, that's not really my name, but I think people do that.
And it's literally the reaction counts for me. Like, I generally don't care about things very much, so like, you can do anything you want.
that.
You should have done that. Alright, I gotta go. You were close. Okay, bye-bye.
Oh, guys, I'm just gonna be out.
Yeah,
He's
that's-
been divorced twice. He has 3 kids, and he told me that like he talked about them like she's 13, he's da-da-da. Didn't even say their names. I was like, oh, what are their names? And he's like, well, I don't have to like see them if I don't want to. And I was like, you sound well. Yeah. I was like,
Sounds like a great guy.
yeah. I was like, I don't think we're gonna go out again.
One word.
But he just asked me out again. I'm not gonna go. Are you kidding? And he told me that he's like, I was like, yeah, so, like, he told me that he's like going the opposite direction, that he's like trying to drink his brain cells away. I was like, okay, why am I out with you?
So he's basically telling me he's like.
He sucks. He sucks all around.
Time out. What?
He didn't even wait till you guys were like
I know.
close to like tell him how bad he is.
Right, I'm like, oh my god. Well, at least he wore it on his sleeve. I'm just like, I'm not going out with you again. Are you kidding?
That's good.
Like, this sounds awful.
Wait, he told you that.
He told me that he's like, yeah, I mean, I try and use as little brain cells as possible. He used to be an investment banker. He like graduated with his master's from Dartmouth. I'm thinking, okay, great. Like,
Was he like a jerk? Like,
I think he's a total jerk. He wasn't a jerk, but like, he's such a jerk.
so,
Like the way he speaks is just like, I'm like,
He's going downhill.
Yeah, he's going way downhill.
I-
And he doesn't care about his kids at all.
oh, he has kids. Okay.
He said, I don't want to see them.
He's like, I don't have to see them if I don't want to.
That's all
I'm
I
like,
needed to hear. Oh, yes.
yep, that's all I needed to hear. And I was just like, I want to go home now.
Yeah, that kind of guy is.
Yeah, ew. Gross, get away from
I
me.
wonder what's going on in his life.
A lot of drinking, Grant.
Yeah, a lot of drinking. He owns a brewery.
Not a lot of thinking.
Not a lot of thinking. lots
He
of
owns a brewery, so like I was like, okay, well.
Interesting.
Anyways, back to Cody.
Yeah.
Yeah. He just sent me a message asking me out again, that's why I brought
Gotcha. Free lunch, huh?
it up. That's true, but I mean, at what cost?
That's true. Okay. So, continuing our conversation about RESTful stuff and like JSON and Spring, we're gonna write some tests. All right, so we'll look at what tests look like. Because if you wanted to test this stuff, it'd be kind of difficult. So generally how you test web application endpoints is you make a pretend web request to those endpoints and you see like what happened before and after, right? So check this out. So we have a source test resources directory that we haven't ever used until this very moment. Remember how we have our resources directory for our application? It stores all our static assets, like including this application.properties file. We also have a test one. We'll load like the templates and this the application.properties for when you run the tests, right? You need to not mark it as resource. You can mark it as test resources. Okay. So you need to create a application.properties here. Application.properties. And they're going to paste some stuff in there. So remember, this is the JDBC connection string to an H2 database that's an in-memory database. So it gets trashed every time you restart your application, which makes it ideal for testing because we don't give a crap about the testing data. We start from scratch and we delete it at the end. Yep. And so you have, remember, Spring JPA generate DDL is a setting in the application.settings that allows you to generate the database schema when you start up your application.
What does the MEM stand for?
In memory.
And that's like basically not storing it. That's like for the like when you run it, it's storing it, and then when you stop running it, it's done.
It stores it in memory.
Right, but it's not like persistent.
I'm trying to make a point here. It persisted in memory. Memory is volatile. It's not, when you turn off your computer, all memory is dumped,
Oh.
right? So when you close your application, the memory the operating system allocated to run your application is freed. So all the data that was in that memory is gone. So all the data you persisted is now kaput.
Is that where the garbage collector comes in?
Not exactly.
Okay.
So your operating system, when you run an application, it allocates memory to run your application, and the application has an option to request more memory from your OS, right? So that's generally what happens, is that your application's memory, it grows, like the memory it takes up grows, because it's requesting more memory from the operating system. Garbage collection happens in the Java runtime. So so garbage collection is basically if you ever have an object that's no longer being referenced, is no longer reachable in the code at all, it'll free up that memory that object took up without you having to do anything.
Oh, that's nice.
In C, in older languages like C and C++, you had to explicitly free every block of memory you allocated.
Wow.
And if you've ever heard of a memory leak, has ever heard of a memory leak?
Mm-hmm.
That meant that the programmer who wrote the code, who wrote the C or C++ code, failed to free all the memory he allocated. In a lot of cases, that'll eat up all the memory that you have, and it'll crash your.
It sounds like
Oh.
programming sucked.
Yeah. It sounds like we got the good end of it.
Because it's the rush of solving a problem is the same in any language.
But it would take like triple. I feel like triple the amount of time to do like the same thing, if not more.
Yeah, that's the reason why not Brendan, he wrote JavaScript. It's the reason why Craphead, Gosling, not Ryan Gosling, James Gosling invented Java.
I love them all. I make all the frameworks and everything.
Yeah,
It's much easier.
and
Who
people,
wrote JavaScript?
Brendan Eich, he wrote it in 2 weeks. Is
It's
it?
awesome. Flipping genius.
It was an insane task of engineering to design a language and implement it in 2 weeks. And then there was a chance that it was going to be forgotten by the internet and just washed away. Because there are many languages that are similar to that were never used. But by chance, in a very specific series of circumstances, JavaScript basically became viral. And now is the language of the web. And
Is that the fastest somebody's ever written a language?
No. I wrote a language in 3 days.
Did you really?
It was not a good 3 days for me, but I had a final project that was due, and I was going to fail, so I had to get done. It was a terrible language. It's probably the fastest mainstream language ever created. Yes, absolutely. Like a language that's ever been used by anyone else.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say it's probably the fastest. But like people write languages.
All the time?
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't realize that. Like,
If you think about it, the language is defined by the compiler that compiles it. So if you write a compiler, you're specifying the language. This is a little bit off topic, but still pretty cool, so I'm all right talking about it. But just to bring it all back a little bit, when we run our tests, we're going to be using this application.properties file instead of the main application.properties file. So instead of storing things not in memory, so file system, we're storing things in memory. So when our application closes, the memory's lost, we lose our data, right? Which again makes it ideal for testing. So when we created our project, it gave us this Angular Spring application test class, right? So the Spring initializer came with this already there. So let's modify this and talk about it.
Why is there a cross through it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, deprecated. Who knows? What? What's
Does that
going
mean it doesn't exist anymore?
on? No. Deprecated. So it looks like Spring Framework consolidated the usage of this into its own Spring test annotation, Spring Boot test. So we can update these notes. So there's a value. These classes. Really? Interesting. So let's replace this with, let's just give it a shot here. Let's say this is a Spring Boot test. Okay. So build the web application context though. I'll have to look into this because this is different.
And what was the command that you taught me yesterday with the brackets? Where you can scroll between.
Yeah, if you navigate to a type by clicking Command click, you can go back by Command open curly bracket. You can go forward with Command close curly bracket, so you can navigate like that. Anyway, we're going to run our tests just like we have in our lesson here, and we'll investigate the changes they've made to unit testing in Spring later. But basically, you start out your test by creating a web application context, and you have this mock MVC class that's designed to make pretend HTTP requests to your application. So if you look at the web application context interface, there's an interface to provide configuration for a web application. So like when your web app runs, it's going to have a web application context. So when you load one by default, it's going to have that. So we're basically going to, when we run our tests, we need to pretend like we're an actual running web application. So it's going to have to load in a web application context. And we have a mock MVC here. It should say basically what I said a second ago. It says, wait, this isn't right. This, okay. So it's basically just a builder for a MVC request mocking. So a mock, in testing terms, is a object that pretends to perform a task but doesn't really perform that task. So if you mock an object, you can, it's very useful for testing because you can be like, you can tell the mock object to do things that are exactly the same as what you normally would do, but it will return a predictable result. Right? We'll look at examples here in a second. So basically here we're in this before annotation. So this method will run before our tests run. So this annotation says, when running tests, it is common to find that several tests need similar objects created before they can run. So before any tests are running, we're initializing this mock MVC field into this, which is basically building a mock MVC object that's based off of the current web application context. Right? So basically we're setting up queries against the current web application that we're testing. Right? So if we want to test our adding user method, We need to auto-wire a user repository since we're going to be dealing with users. So we have a field that gets auto-wired like so. Right. We also have this test method here. So let's check this test method out. So keep in mind that when writing tests, again, this test annotation marks this as a test. The method signature, it has no return type and accepts no parameters. So in this method here, we're going to be writing our test code that tests the addition of a user. Okay. So to do that, we're going to make a new user object. We're going to use its setters to set these fields. This object mapper class is used, it's a part of the Spring framework to basically build JSON objects for testing. So we look at the sources here, we can read the documentation. So basically, object mapper is the JSON or job library for Spring. It's already baked into Spring. You don't have to also include other things. So we're making a new object mapper object, and we're saying write value as string user. So we look at write value as string. It says method that can be used to serialize any Java value as a string. Right. So the value we're serializing is this user object that we just defined up here. So just to give you some context, we're using this to set up our pretend request to the post endpoint. Okay. So we're assigning this value to the JSON string, and we're performing a MVC request to our web application using the mock MVC field.
That's going to do a post.
Yes, so we have this class here, mock MVC request builders. So it's static factory methods for the request builders. So it doesn't give us much really good information, but basically if you want to build a request, you would start with saying mock MVC request builders. So this post method is a static method. Note that this also returns a mock. This returns a mock HTTP servlet request builder. You're not really supposed to look into these types because it gets pretty deep. Basically, this is designed for you to easily write, like semantically, the type of request you're making. So we're making a post request with this content, and we're setting the content type, right? So if I wanted to get requests, I can use get instead. So also put, patch, and delete.
Just narrative it for you.
So we can specify anything that your browser could send as a part of a request, you could specify in this mock MVC request object. Okay. So mock MVC will perform the request against your web application context. The request builder will build a request. So this will, anything that your browser can do, this can do, right?
When you're writing tests for things, not specifically Spring, but should you also use the MVC? Or is that just Spring?
It's part of Spring.
Okay.
Yeah, but in general, the concept is going to be similar.
Yeah. So this one.
Yeah. So after we post this data to the add user endpoint or the user endpoint, then we know that we should have one user in the database. So if we do, then the test succeeded. Yay! So it passed. That's good. So all that crap works just fine and dandy. So do you see what we're doing here? There's a lot of different classes at play here. So it's not so much important that you can just off the top of your head remember what those class names are, how to get to them, but just to remember the concepts of what we're talking about. So in general, we're making pretend requests to our web app and testing what comes out on the other end. What comes out on the other end is that we have an added user to our database. Cool. So correspondingly, let's add more tests for like delete, for instance. So this is going to run after our insert. So we're going to delete the first user, and then we're going to insert that the user is 0. You know what? This is not going to work properly. Okay, let's cancel this, and let's stop this. Let's remove that. Because when I hit the triangle, I hit this guy right here. I could just hit this guy right here, and it'll make a run configuration that'll always automatically detect all my tests and run all the tests. So if I click this guy, it'll make a run configuration that runs just this one test. But that's not really useful to me if I'm adding another test. So I'm just adding, yeah, there we go. Now it runs both.
So it runs the user after add?
Yeah.
So you're basically deleting the user that you already added?
Yeah.
Okay. Because when I wrote the test for delete from some of the past, I was like,
How do I know what to delete?
yeah, because I was like, oh, well, that one always threw me, but okay, that makes sense.
It is kind of strange because if I were to run this in isolation, it would fail.
It's going to fail.
Well, it might fail. We'll see how it works.
Because I always added the user within the test of delete and then deleted that from an array.
Fail.
Yeah, so this is a little strange because this one test relies on the execution of the previous test. So that is a little weird, I agree.
Yeah.
But what you could do is create a sample user, for instance, that doesn't hit your URL endpoint. You could just use Hibernate to persist a user, a test user.
Okay.
And then test your deletion off that test user. Right. But since we're testing add user as well, we're just utilizing that same data and just deleting it with our test delete user.
Sort of seems like you're killing two birds with one stone here by doing both of them.
Yeah.
Because we can delete user, then that means you added one.
Yeah, it is handy, but I kind of agree with Mike here in that it seems like a pre-test step to add a sample user to your database, like to basically seed your database with some values before you run any MVC operations.
Just to isolate each one of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like it's kind of because like usually how tests work are you work on one test at a time. Like you work on one method at a time. So if it's a little strange that this delete user test is predicated upon the add user functioning properly.
That makes logical sense, like, because you have to have a user before you delete a user.
Yeah, but you could
So
you could perform the same action in just the before method. Like where we were building this application context, you could just put also like new user and user repository.save. So your job is not to test Hibernate. So this is a big thing. So you might be asking yourself like, I don't know, what we're testing here is whether or not our URL endpoints do what we think they do. All right, so the add user URL endpoint is going to call Hibernate and add a user object through Hibernate to your database. If we add a sample user object to our database outside of that, then we can just do that. Like it's not, we're not concerned about Hibernate doing its job, basically, right?
So would you say like a different way to do this would be to add a user in the before?
Yeah.
And then in your add user, like maybe just change it to like count equals 2, make if you're adding another one,
Yeah.
and then you have like a delete, you can still use user one and edit, and then you can run all those tests separately.
Because the before is always going to run, even if you run just one test.
For every test.
Yeah.
So you could always.
No, it's going to run once every time you run tests.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So like,
So you could always use user one for like your delete and edit to test them, and
Yes.
that will always be there.
Makes sense.
cool. Good questions, guys. I want you to understand that the level of questions you're asking recently are much higher than actually even last week. We're having conversations that are a lot like programmers would have, and not programmers and students. So that's a good sign, right?
Makes us feel good too.
Yeah, it means you guys are learning. You're learning how to learn, basically. So I love the questions you guys are asking nowadays. What do you want, Albert?
Should we go over the projects?
Yes. Can we
Sounds-
confer real quick before we give it out to them, though?
Yeah,
Did you write it up, by the way?
I have pictures. I didn't write it up. in
Okay.
text, Yeah.
Can we go over what to do if we're behind?
Yeah. We'll talk about that too.
We need to do that too. I have a guy who needs to leave at 12:30.
We can go ahead and get started. This second example we're going to go over, we can like leave that as a student exercise if you're so interested. So we can call it quits for today's lecture. I think we covered enough material. We're going to use a lot of the stuff in today's lecture for our weekend homework. So that's coming up next. Okay, adoring fans. I will see you when I get home.
Jesus, we really want some.